got a bidet! Hey everybody, and welcome back for another video. In today's video, we are kicking off the brand new podcast segments here on the channel called Shoot the Sheev. Play on a little bit of a fun phrase that I like to use. And also, we got Sheev in play. We got him up here in the banner, obviously in the thumbnail. But this is going to be a podcast in general that's going to be kind of a, what's the Star Wars topic of the week, or I don't know, of the day, whatever. But the point is that it's supposed to be fun topics, both controversial and maybe just ones that you may not think about. And we're going to have some people on here, whether it's just me and Sarah, or if we get some special guests in here as well, just to spice it up a little bit. And we're very excited to start this with all of you, especially since you guys tend to like the talk show type and podcast like segments. So today's, as you saw from the thumbnail, we are talking about the shows that came from 2022. These are the major shows. I know there was some like lingering little short things that are not part of this segment. Some of them to name would be like the little Grogu animation thing that was done. And also Lego Star Wars Vacation. We're not talking about those. We're talking about the major shows that came out this year, which the four that we're going to be talking about are Book of Boba Fett, Andor, Tales of the Jedi, and Kenobi. We have talked about all of these shows individually on this channel already. If they came out week to week, we did a show week to week on our impressions based on those episodes that were released. Check out our playlist in case you want to see what our opinions were week to week. But I will preface this talk segment about each of these shows. We've had a decent amount of time to be able to reflect on and think about, and it's not our mindsets that have happened week to week. So I would say that this could be very, very different from what you might expect based on our first impressions of all this stuff. So some of these revelations of our rankings may be a surprise to you. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to start off with our number 4 choice, because we got 4 shows. And everybody hold back here. My number 4 choice for 2022 was Andor. I know tons of people really, really enjoyed Andor, but that is my number 4 for 2022.
It was mine too.
Yeah, so for this one, not all, but for this one, Sarah and I are on the same page. I will say it's not because we just want to hate the show. I know a lot of people out there say, well, if you don't like Andor, you're not a Star Wars fan. I've seen people say your IQ is not high enough, so you're not smart enough for the show. That's a true story. I did see that. But ultimately, I think what happened for me was that, first of all, Andor wasn't really a show that I was asking for. Like, it wasn't something I was going out there really excited to watch. So really, I had no expectations for this show, which is a good thing, because I know for some of the other shows, I had a little bit higher expectations, and my week-to-week impressions fell a little short. But Andor, I went in completely open-minded, and I was hopeful to see some really cool things. There were some cool things, but not enough to push this ranking a little bit higher for me. Also, I feel like what's going on with Andor is that the creative team behind it wanted to do something different. And if you watch the show compared to the other shows that were released, you can definitely tell not only is there an aesthetic difference, like the way it looks and it's visually presented, but the tone and the feel is very, very different. I feel to a point, if you didn't put Star Wars on the show, it could have completely been a different show. It just had kind of the aesthetics of Star Wars. But with that idea that they're very, very different, I think just the way that it was done just didn't quite click for me. That has to do with definitely the pacing of the show. A lot of the Star Wars stuff that I'm used to is probably a little bit more fast paced, as opposed to this show, which seemed to take, 3 episodes at a time to get the point across for something that could have been probably done in 2 or I don't want to say 1 because that would mean they're cramming it, but definitely 2 episodes probably if they extended those episodes just a little bit longer, but not enough to basically copy and paste the 3rd episode into it. So the pacing issues were there. I don't really remember hardly any of the characters' names. And that was kind of a testament to when I saw Rogue One, because a lot of times people were like, when you saw the movie from episode 7, 8, 9, you could name off quite a few characters. Rogue One, I couldn't name hardly any of them. And same thing for this show. I could barely remember their names, even week to week when we were doing episode talks. So I think caring about some of these characters was really not quite there for me. I will say towards the end of the show, it started to get me there a little bit. But some of the, I want to say, like carrot in front of you, and then it was pulled away at the last second, mainly being, was it Srill? Was that his name? He was the big one for me, and probably one of the big ones for Sarah, where we spent so much time with that character. And I think that the show creators wanted us to care about him so much that his payoff in the end just wasn't there. So things like that with even some other characters just didn't quite add up for me. I do want to give Sarah some floor here as well. I don't want to possibly say all the things that she wants to say. So, Sarah, what were some of your thoughts for Andor and kind of why it was at the bottom of the list for you?
Yeah, well, to add on to what you mentioned, I still remember those first couple episodes, because they came out with three. I think it was three all at once. I didn't want to get past episode two. Like I plain didn't want to watch because I was bored. And that's bad. Like, it wasn't just an IQ thing. I can see why somebody might generalize and say that. I don't agree with it, but I can see why somebody would think that's an easy thing to say to kind of differentiate people, even though I don't think it's true. Um, but if you make a show that's so complicated that only some people can understand it, well, then you're not really appealing to the masses. So, aside from the starting out boring, it did get better for me. There was more that I was able to pick up on. There was even some things I think story-wise that I was able to pick up on that maybe Jeremy didn't, and vice versa. So we were able to kind of help each other understand the show in that way. There were some characters that were pretty cool. Seeing the inner workings of Mon Mothma and the antique dealer and stuff, but like you said with Cyril, there wasn't enough payoff for a lot of these characters. They bounced around to so many characters so often that you didn't really get anything real meaty with any of them. And even with Cassian, there's a lot of him just going from place to place and not a whole lot actually happening. Everybody's preparing for his arrival, but there's not enough danger level. There's not enough excitement, except for maybe 2 episodes, 3 episodes maybe. Um, so it didn't have the level of action I would expect in a Star Wars show.
I'm trying to think, what was the Imperial officer's name?
Dedra?
Dedra. I think she was probably my favorite character in the show. I think the actress did a great job with really just giving some solid acting as far as, we really haven't seen a lot of female Imperials. I think we had Phasma for the sequel trilogy as far as, big female leads within the quote unquote bad guys of the show. Um, so I thought she did a great job. I would say to a degree, I thought that her character somewhat had not quite the payoff. But I do remember when you were referencing how we watched the first three episodes when they first came out. Was it three or was it two?
I thought it was three.
So I think it was three because it was supposed to premiere and then they delayed it 2 weeks. And then we got all three of those. So yeah, I think we got the first three, and I remember getting through the first two. I was kind of like, uh-oh. And then after the third one, I was kind of like, um, it was good, but I wasn't interested. So the show didn't do enough to pull me in from the beginning. I will say, because we've talked about a lot of the things that we didn't like, and why it's lower on our list. A couple of things I did like. Number one of the aesthetic things that I thought was really cool with the show, and really you probably missed it if you weren't looking for it, or you just didn't make the connection, was that in Srill's bedroom, he had like action figures of stormtroopers and officers. So it was kind of like the G.I. Joe effect that we had, with our generations during war times. I thought that was kind of a really cool touch that they, you know, showed something that we've seen in our world and they put it in the Star Wars world. And, it is, these are our heroes and, we want to play out our own battles kind of a thing. So I thought that was a really cool touch. And also, the amount that they were able to put into the show about the Empire. I know we saw quite a bit, and I'm sure we're going to see more in the future because I think Andor is supposed to be at least 3 seasons. I thought it was supposed to be 5, and then they cut it to 3, but I can't remember. But we're definitely getting a season 2. So I'm sure we're going to see more about what's going on with the Empire during this time. But I really enjoyed seeing more and more of the building of the Empire. Also, the show did give us some different types of emotions and feelings when we were watching it. I know when I was watching it, and before this show came out, we're like, Team Empire, yeah, on this channel, and I still am. But it at times made me feel uncomfortable to be able to say that, just based on seeing how the Empire was treating people in the show, and they were giving more breath to that. But at the end of the day, it's a TV show, and ultimately, I am Team Darth Vader. So there's the Empire for you.
I
Also,
did like, I was gonna say, I did like the speech that they did in the final, I think it was the final episode when Cassian's mom died and they had that speech playing in the streets. I thought that was a pretty powerful scene. I liked that.
yeah, they had a couple of pretty good speeches in this show. That one, and also the one at the prison when everybody was running out. Um, but the other thing I was going to say was it was interesting to feel like when we were watching, there was times where Cassian's group, like if you didn't know what was going on and you just like turned the channel and this show popped on, there could be a chance that you don't know if Cassian's group is the enemy or if the Empire is the enemy. I remember specifically the episode where they were doing the raid, and Cassian and them were taking that Imperial family basically hostage to further their plans, and they were like pointing guns at the wife and stuff. And it was like, you know, would I see Luke Skywalker doing that? Probably not. Maybe he did in the books or comics and I haven't seen it, but it just seems so uncharacteristic. and it was different to see that. And so I thought it was interesting to see the way that they decided to portray both sides throughout the show. Any other thoughts for Andor, Sarah?
No, I wouldn't say it's a horrible show. I wouldn't say it's the worst show, but of 2022 and the shows that came out this past year, for me, it's the worst one of those choices. So I think that's really kind of why it is where it's at.
I would say I'm optimistic for season 2, and I'm hopeful that maybe it'll pull us back into the world. But for now, Andor is our number 4 choice for 2022. And right after this, we will talk about number 3. So stay tuned. Have you ever wondered what Amazon coffins are and what they're full of? Well, we got you covered here on the channel. Check out our playlist of our Amazon coffin unboxings, where Sarah and I open up boxes that have Amazon returns, and we share with all of you what we get in each of those boxes. If you ever wanted to get into liquidation and want to know what types of things you can find, check us out. Now back to our show. Okay, we are back. We are ready to talk about our number 3 of 2022. So my number 3 is going to be the Book of Boba Fett. We got the beginning of this show in, like, I think it was like the last week of December, and then the rest of the show was in 2022. The last week of December 2021, and then the rest of it was 2022. Book of Boba Fett was an interesting one for me. And I say that because week to week, I know we had some struggles with just the way that they were outlining the show, like with the back and forth and whatnot, because I think we really wanted to see a lot of the what's going on now. But looking back, it was important to see where he was from. And it kind of shapes where he's going. It kind of explained to us, all those different moves that he did when he met Mando in season 2 of Mandalorian, because he, like smashed stormtroopers' faces in, I think, with his gaffy stick and whatnot in that show. And we really had no rhyme or reason to why he would know how to do that stuff, except for the fact of just accepting that Boba Fett is amazing and just maybe he does that stuff. So it was kind of cool to see that, where he learned that style of fighting, and also just kind of where he's at as a person right now. I feel like, aside from the animated shows and whatnot, we really don't get to know Boba on a personal level, and this show was able to breathe some of that into our knowledge, so to speak. I liked how we got Chris Hansen involved. He was probably the character that I saw in this show, aside from Boba, that I was like, wow, I want to know more about that guy. Just because he was another Wookiee. He had this thing on his eye, and I was like, what is that? And, soon after the show came out, there was people saying, oh, from the comics, that's from actually Kenobi. And it was like, are we going to get some sort of little bit of extra information on that? It would have been kind of a cool segue to Kenobi if they would have done like a flashback scene for him or something that would show Ewan McGregor. But aside from that kind of stuff, I love how it had the Western feel. I think the surprising character that I really enjoyed, but he wasn't new to me, was Cad Bane. Absolutely loved seeing Cad Bane in live action and seeing what he was going to do, in this show. He seemed very, very menacing. To see, he seemed almost more aggressive than his Clone Wars and like Rebels appearances in the animated shows. So I thought that was really cool. Not only that, the final battle was really sweet. Of how they took it to the streets, just like, a Western would be. We got to see Boba riding a Rancor into battle, which was really cool. And honestly, Tamora Morrison, he's just really, really cool dude, and he does a great job with Boba Fett. So I think between all those, the show was pretty good. But there was a handful of things that just didn't quite click for me, like the like cyberpunk type dealing with
The
Fennec.
moped thing.
Yeah, well, yeah, the moped gang too. But Fennec had to be put together. And then the moped gang comes into play, which is basically a gang of people that have had those uh, things done to them. Uh, I know that Rodriguez, who is the director of quite a few of these episodes, he is responsible for things like Spy Kids. And so we really kind of had a feel of Spy Kids with that gang in particular. Um, and I don't think that was quite the place for this show, is like having that kind of a thing going on. Also, one thing that was kind of, there was a handful of things that just made your head scratch, like the first battle that we got to see between, it was like Bulba and Fennec against the people that were trying to jump them in the streets, and we were all like, why doesn't he use his jetpack? Um, you know, stuff like that that made us really question. Some of the choreography almost looked too staged, which was a problem for us. We think that there probably could have been a little bit better job with that to make it feel more realistic. Um, and also, I think we can never forget this one. The chase sequence in the streets with the moped people that were going like 10 miles an hour trying to chase after uh trying to remember Major Dobo, is that what it's called?
I don't remember.
It's whatever Zazu is to Mufasa. I know that because that's how I remember the name.
He was the mayor's assistant.
Yeah. So there's that quote unquote high speed chase through the streets, and the biker gang is going through there, and look, it kind of looks like a bunch of grannies chasing after somebody with their electric scooters. So I thought that was kind of a misstep. They could have done better there. So just a couple of things that just seemed really silly and out of place for the show. So I think that was ultimately my quote unquote issues with it. Sarah, what were your thoughts on the book of Boba Fett?
I did not have it as my number three, but I'll get to that in a little bit later. I overall, in remembering the show anyway, I know it's been quite some time since we've seen it. I thought it was pretty fun. There was a fair amount of action. We got to see his backstory, which I know you could say the same thing with Cassian and Andor, but this is somebody who, um, I find his character a bit more interesting than Andor's, just from what we had seen already in the previous films. Uh, Being that he's a bounty hunter, that's a pretty cool occupation. Um,
Not to mention, he's the quiet guy in the room. So what's going on with him?
yeah, it's always the quiet ones. No, but you know, how did he escape the Sarlacc pit? We got to see that. We got to see how he became the amazing fighter that he is, like you had mentioned earlier, and the training with the Tusken Raiders. And I remember at first thinking it was kind of weird about them going back and forth so much between present day in the Boba world, right? And his training with the Tusken Raiders, they kind of went back and forth a lot, and that being a little confusing. But if you think about the information we were able to get from these things, I did really like the sequences with the Tusken Raiders, how the children were able to, still, um, in a way it was slavery, but that a child was able to control him. And then he went from somebody who was so weak that a child was in charge of him to somebody as strong as, you get your own gaffy stick, and the ceremony of how you get your stick and how you carve it and everything else like that. And it brings a lot more to the Tusken Raider world than just people that go "Woo, woo, woo." So being able to have more to them, I thought that was pretty cool. Um, seeing Chrysanthemum, that was pretty cool too, and just the way that that town worked. Uh, there were some minor things here or there, like you mentioned, about like the moped gang and stuff. And I didn't really mind so much the mod shop that Fennec went to get fixed up. That wasn't, at least looking back, it wasn't that big of a deal to me as compared to the moped gang that seemed like they drove around a bunch of little wheats.
I think what kind of bothers me a bit about that, because we also saw, I think at the end of the show that was it the what was his name? He was the guy that was in charge of the other town. The marsh is he the marshal?
Yeah.
Like we had suspected that he died, but then they like were doing things to him mechanically as well. Wasn't that at the end of the show?
There was some sort of way that he came back to life that didn't seem like it was necessarily fair. Like they kind of cheated death.
So that's kind of where I'm coming from on like there's this idea with Disney that for their Star Wars that you know there's a good chance that people never die just because there's somehow some way that they keep coming back. And I think Disney's a little bit afraid to kill off some of their characters that people are, starting to gravitate towards. But I think it would add a bit more depth to the story and caring about these characters if there was some of that uh actual realism of they're dead, they're gone, it's over. Whereas we're starting to think, do they come back? Which is a big thing in another show that we'll be talking about later on. But yeah, I think they're pulling out some of that uh, buy-in as far as characters actually being dead when they are dead. Like another one for this show, which this one I'm actually hopeful that he's still alive. But there's that small chance that Cad Bane is still alive because of the beeping and the how much the camera focused on him when Boba left him. So even that had some uh, disbelief of whether he's dead or not.
Yeah. I think this show, it definitely had its own problems. I would say most shows do. I wouldn't really expect any show to be perfect, but the wrongdoings in this show were small enough, I think, and not frequent enough for it to really put this one at number 3 or 4 on my list. That's why I'm placing this one a bit higher.
Let's also not forget some of the. It's funny because some people say that this is, the best part of the show and it has nothing to do with Boba Fett. But we can't forget that this is actually kind of like The Mandalorian 2.5 in a way, because there was like three or four episodes that Mando was a part of, and they were really good episodes with Ahsoka and Luke Skywalker. So this show did bring quite a bit with them as well. So we can't be too mad there. The one thing that's going to really drive me nuts, but also make me a little happy, I don't know how to feel about it just because it was unexpected at the end of the show, is that at the very end, when Bulba is basically, the one in charge and he's accomplished what he needed to, and he's able to rule with respect, as he says to Fennec, maybe this isn't for us. And so it sometimes feels that maybe this show, there was almost no point to it. Like, is he just going to turn over rule to the marshal and then go back to being the bounty hunter that we know him to be? So that's kind of the two ways that, I could be very, very disappointed the fact that we kind of wasted our time with some of this stuff. But maybe he'll go back to being, this really cool bounty hunter that we all remember, and, further his story.
Do have to remember it is the book of Boba Fett. Books have many chapters that aren't necessarily all leading to one endpoint. They can kind of weave and wander their story, to give you some side stories and whatnot. In terms of it all being for nothing, I would think of it as just a giant adventure. And I'm sure he learned a lot of things, and this was how he got to heal, right? Because so much of this time he spent in the back tank. Um, that at some point he's got to use, not only the knowledge from the Tusken Raiders, which we found out about because he'd have visions of it when he was in the Bacta tank. And I don't think he's quite done with the Hutts. There's still a lot of conflict with them. I feel like they're going to come back and there's going to be some sort of something to go on between them.
They could. Um, I haven't even heard if they are doing a season 2, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So before we go on to number 2, Sarah, what was your number 3?
My number 3 was Tales of the Jedi.
Interesting enough. We'll see what my number 2 show is when we come back after this. Have you seen The Mandalorian? Do you wonder what Operation Cinder was that they mentioned in this show? Well, we got you covered because we have an entire playlist dedicated to the Star Wars Battlefront 2 campaign, which highlights Operation Cinder. So if you check out our playlist, you'll be able to see what actually happened with Operation Cinder and know what they're talking about with the show. Now back to ours. Okay, we are back for my number 2 show for 2022. And my number 2 show for 2022 is going to be Tales of the Jedi. This was a show that kind of came out of nowhere in a way. Like when I heard the title of the show, I didn't really know what to expect. We saw a trailer for it, and the show gave us kind of the idea that it's gonna, talk about different Jedi origin stories. And our first thoughts were that it was gonna focus on, like, have different episodes focus on different people. And really the main focus here was Ahsoka and Count Dooku. We got to see Dooku's early on being as a Jedi and like how he became part of the dark side, which was really cool. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. And then Ahsoka's side of the story was interesting. It wasn't as cohesive as Count Dooku's, just because it kind of seemed like it was showing different parts of Ahsoka's life as opposed to building one small little arc. Because we've seen Ahsoka and her origin Jedi days plenty of times within the Clone Wars, Rebels, the Clone Wars movie, so on and so forth. So really for Ahsoka stuff, it was kind of just trying to explain how she was able to do certain things, and also just where she came from before the Jedi. Because when we saw her the very first time, it was literally, here's this girl, Anakin, train her. We had like no context of where she was from. So the show, showed where she was from as a baby, showed like her early connections to the Force. We saw, why was she a Jedi that could survive Order 66? And it was from, the crazy amounts of training that Anakin had her do with the clones, because the clones are smarter than droids. So she better be prepared to be able to handle clones, because therefore she should be prepared for the droids. So we kind of got that dynamic and explained why she was able to make it out of Order 66. Then we also kind of got to see how she got back into things, because she comes back in Rebels. She left the Jedi at the end of Clone Wars, and then during Rebels, she got back into the Rebel Alliance part of things. And for that, she was outed as a Jedi by somebody in her tribe, and then she got back with back in contact with Bail Organa, and is now with the Rebels. So that's really all she had. Again, that's really spotty. They don't really connect to one another in the show, but it was interesting enough from her point of view just some of these answers to why. I know a lot of times people know information about Star Wars because they read the books or the comics. And when people that only watch the movies say, why can they do this? This is ridiculous. And then we finally got some of that explanation in film form. So I thought that was a nice touch. On the other side of the show, which in my opinion was the meat and potatoes of this show, was Count Dooku. He was his arc to me was phenomenal. He started off as a Jedi, and we started to see, why was he questioning the Jedi? Why did he want to look elsewhere? When the Jedi were responding in certain ways to not only things around the galaxy, but also personal instances. So some examples of that. We saw how him and Qui-Gon went to a planet to save a senator's kidnapped son, and he saw that the senator himself was, being awful to his own people. So Dooku was like, well, as the Jedi, we're supposed to be people of the peace. Why are we backing up a Senate that is, doing these bad things? So he started to question his own alignment with the Jedi on this. And then, with his Padawan, Qui-Gon, when he's being a master with Obi-Wan and he sees a Sith Lord, the council and everybody's kind of mocking him, saying, Darth Maul, or the Sith, they don't really know his name, the Sith is a joke. There's no way he could have seen them because they have been gone for, hundreds and hundreds of years. So that led to, Dooku being pushed away further because the fact that they didn't take action properly, he lost one of his very close, friends and I would say to a point family within the Jedi Order just because they were being careless. So this pushes him even further. And then, once he's actually with Darth Sidious, he does end up killing Yaddle. It like finalizes him being on the dark side because he slaughters one of the Jedi Masters from the Council. So I thought it was a really, really good way to show Dooku's growth. Mind you, these episodes are only 10 minutes long, so I don't remember what the episode count was, but they accomplished a lot for Dooku in a very short amount of time. Not only that,
I think there were 6 episodes total.
so if we got 6
I think.
episodes, then he had like 30 minutes of screen time to show all this stuff. That yeah, Sarah can look it up for us. But some other really cool things that they were able to do with this show, they brought back Liam Neeson for Qui-Gon. Oh, there were 6 episodes. So, Dooku had 30 minutes of screen time to, accomplish so much. Oh, and there was also another episode where he was trying to figure out, what was happening with a Jedi that was slaughtered. And, Mace Windu was like, you can't do that. And he was like, well, why not? They're our own people. They flat out murdered them. And so the fact that the Jedi seem to not have their own backs also, pushing Dooku away. What I was saying was that, they had Liam Neeson playing Qui-Gon. Awesome. They had, it's escaping me. Ian McDiarmid. He was playing the Emperor, which was super cool. Unfortunately, we didn't have Christopher Lee, rest in peace, but we did have someone that, did a great job with him, of course. But it was really cool to have the touch on these shows of the original people being involved. I know when we talked about the show on the channel, Sarah and I differed in this opinion, but I thought the animation was phenomenal. I know it follows that Clone Wars style, so like humans aren't supposed to look like, God of War or something from the PlayStation 5. They have a style to them. But like if you take the people out of it, it looks just like a film. So I feel like the way that they were able to paint the picture, so to speak, was amazing. And they did a great job with it. My hope, even though this it's called Tales of the Jedi, and really one of them was about how a Jedi fell to the dark side. I'm hoping we get something that's kind of like Tales of the Sith, and we learn a little bit more about them. Because there's so much stuff that they could probably talk about, uh, even if they're doing two at a time, like they did with this show. Sarah, what did you think of Tales of the Jedi?
So I had this ranked as my number three instead of my number two. And one of the only reasons why I didn't put it as number four at the bottom of the list was the Ahsoka backstory. I'm gonna get to that in a minute. I'm gonna start with Dooku because I know that one was your favorite. But the because I had to basically have you spoon feed me that story because I just could not. First of all, I had a hard time recognizing the characters because I'm not used to that animation style. Maybe it's because I haven't seen the Clone Wars, but there were some characters that were pretty recognizable and a lot of them that weren't. And so to not be able to tell who's who makes it really difficult to follow a story,
Not to drive the wedge,
especially
not to drive the wedge even further, but you have watched The Bad Batch, and that's the exact same.
it is not even close.
It is.
Not even
That
close.
challenge flag. Check the review. Keep
And
going.
also, hey, Bad Batch was new characters, not people that you're already supposed to know. So these characters were introduced in Bad Batch, whereas this show, you're just expected to know who these people are.
The Star Wars nerd in me is it came up in the Clone Wars, but I digress.
What did?
They were introduced in the Clone Wars show.
Okay, but like Omega and everybody else were
Omega is the
introduced in that show.
Omega was the only one that wasn't. Carry on.
That show is a whole separate thing. We'll I'm excited for the new season. We'll leave it at that. About Tales of the Jedi. Okay, so as I was saying, having to have the story spoon fed to even understand what's going on with who these characters are is not enjoyable. That is not how I would choose to take in a film or a series of shorts, which is really what I feel like this show was because the episodes were so short and the season wasn't that long. It almost could have been just one short of a half-hour episode for each character and be done with it. I don't like how they chose to do this storytelling with the little 10-minute episodes that jump so far in between. And it wasn't Ahsoka Dooku, or Ahsoka for three, Dooku for three. It kind of, they were mingled, I believe, in a weird way that didn't make sense. And maybe it was a timeline order kind of thing, but you never knew which episode was going to be about which character until it started. So you don't know what to expect. And I'm not really a big fan of that kind of storytelling either.
I feel like what they tried to do, because I also disagree with the order. I think what they tried to do is to make it like chronological order of what's happening. Because they started with Ahsoka as a baby, and then Dooku, through the Clone Wars, or not Clone Wars, through the episode one type era. And then after that would happen is when the Revenge of the Sith stuff would come into play, which is where Ahsoka picks up again. My guess is it was chronological order, but in a way,
That's
they should have done it 3 and 3, kind of like what you're saying.
that's what my guess is too, and what I was trying to say with timeline order, chronological order. That's what my assumption is what they did. But another big beef I had with this is that I kept expecting their stories to cross, and they don't. And so to not have any continuity between the two characters, I thought that was a big misstep. And maybe it's just that their paths don't cross at all ever. I don't really know because I don't know Star Wars enough to be able to say yes or no. But then it just adds to how it's kind of weird how they did their episode order. Or maybe it's weird as to why they chose these two specific characters, whereas they could have chose, say, Ahsoka and somebody else that her path does cross with, or whoever. Why this is above Andor for me, because I had Andor's 4 and this one is 3. I did really like the Ahsoka stuff, specifically the first episode when she's a baby. I know you can't tell a whole lot from when a kid's a child, but being able to see her village and how their rituals when they have a new baby born, and the whole hunting scene, and being able to, yeah, I thought it was weird that you were teaching a child, the ways of life and death through hunting when she was just a toddler. Because I don't feel like a toddler would really be able to understand at that age, but somehow that's just the way they do things. And being able to learn how she's able to communicate with animals and stuff, and like the scare of the village, not knowing and figuring out that there's something different about this girl. Um, that one episode I thought was pretty cool, and I liked being able to see all those different things. As I was telling Jeremy, before, and we have not discussed our ranks previous to announcing here on the show. I just know that they're different. Uh, this show is so different compared to the other shows that we had this year. It's really kind of difficult to put it into a rank with the other ones, because it's almost like you're comparing apples and oranges. It's hard to find a good spot for this one. But I feel like I had more beefs with it than things that I liked. So that's why it's on the bottom half of my list.
I do think it's a good point to bring up, just to kind of bring both what you said and what I said together as we close up this one, is that when Sarah and I watch these Star Wars shows, we're coming from very, very different points of view. Just like Obi-Wan Kenobi said, it's from a certain point of view. My point of view is, I've seen the movies. I'd say like lived and breathed these things for years and years. Like if I choose something to put in the background, it's Star Wars, and it just gets engraved into my brain. But I also like just seek out different knowledge of Star Wars stuff. Whereas I know Sarah is kind of on I've seen the movies, I've seen most of the shows, and she kind of just goes along with me as far as this new material. So there's a lot of background that I have that she doesn't. So I would say it's kind of the perfect dynamic for this show, because that is what was coming out from the reviews. There's a lot of people, and my guess, the ones that have invested a little bit more time into Star Wars, really enjoyed this stuff because it painted a little bit more of the picture, whereas the people that haven't seen as much were lost. So I think it was fair points to say about the show. Before we get to my number one, what was your number two?
My number 2 was Kenobi.
Interesting enough. We'll be back right after this. Have you ever wondered what it's like to grow up during the prequel era? Do you wonder what type of merchandise was around then? How different was it than it is now? Check out our videos on this channel where we talk about the merchandise of The Phantom Menace and the merchandise of Attack of the Clones. They are here on this channel. The Phantom Menace is my first video ever on YouTube, so there's a special place in my heart for that one. So please, if any, check that out. Now back to our show. All right, everybody, we are back for our number one choice. If you've done process of elimination, you probably know what it's going to be for me. And my number one for 2022 is Kenobi. And that could be a shocker for some of you, because I believe when we talked about this show when it came out, I was a little disappointed, but I didn't really know how to process. I didn't know necessarily why, so to speak. Funny enough, after we watched Andor, I rewatched Kenobi and then absolutely loved it. It's funny how things like that happen. But I was also able to sit down and watch Kenobi like straight through, like 3 episodes at a time. So that kind of helped me as well. So some things about Kenobi. Why is it my number one show? Probably the number one reason why it's my number one show is that I connected with it the most. Um, I personally believe that the ending of Kenobi with Vader and Obi-Wan is probably the best moment of Star Wars in 2022. When Vader has the slit in his helmet, and Kenobi's like pouring his heart out to him, and we're seeing the light change between red and blue on Vader's mask, and we're kind of seeing the conflict in Vader slash Anakin. And when it's red, it's when he's really angry and upset with Kenobi. And when it's blue, it's almost like Anakin's crying out for help to a point. And I feel like that moment was just amazing for the show. Was the show perfect? Absolutely not. One of the things we talked about earlier on in this podcast itself was that there is this idea with Disney that, you could kill somebody off and just bring them back. That was kind of an issue here in a way. When we had the Grand Inquisitor killed, quote unquote, from Reva, I think it was the second episode in, and then everybody, us and a lot of other people were saying, well, hold on a minute. This show is before Rebels, and he's alive in Rebels. Is it just, if you know, and he's still around? Or are they going to try to break continuity for some dumb reason? And we kind of had that weird carrot dangling in front of us. And I honestly thought that was really, really stupid. But that's what, between that and Reva being alive at the end, are my two biggest beefs with the show. I will say that they are things that I don't mind glazing over for the sake of my enjoyment of the show. I do not, and I will never believe that Reva survived what she went through, even though that's what they want us to believe. She was stabbed twice. When you're a kid and you get stabbed, that hole is a lot bigger than what it is as a adult. So I'm sure a lot of her organs were destroyed when that happened. I don't know how Vader could have perfectly put a huge lightsaber through her chest and her survive as a youngling. Furthermore, when she is fighting Vader later on and he does it again, I would think, being Darth Vader, he would have remembered, like he mentions that he remembers her, like she feels this entire show that she's the one in control and she's the one that's going to get him. But then we find out that Vader was the one that was, stringing her along, and then he was eventually going to turn on her. So the idea that he remembers who she was and that somehow she survived being stabbed and he stabs her again, I would think that Vader, would have made it pretty clear that she would be dead. There was a lot of reports that there was reshoots that happened with this show at the last minute, and I want to believe that that was the reshoot, is that they decided that, oh, we should do something with Reva and keep her alive. The actress did what she was supposed to. It is absolutely no hate or wrong doings towards her. She did a phenomenal job with what she was given. To emphasize that point, we were annoyed with her character, and I think we were supposed to be, because in the show, the Inquisitors were annoyed with her. So I think she did a great job with what she was supposed to do. It's just that the handling with the character from Lucasfilm's point of view, I think that was the problem. So don't get it wrong here. She was great, but the story didn't quite make sense. So that was kind of my issues with the story. What I really liked, I already mentioned the ending with Kenobi and Vader. Also, the middle fight with Kenobi and Vader, and how Vader, burned Kenobi and made him feel what he felt. We talk about how Andor had these awesome speeches. Let's not forget what Vader said to Obi-Wan. He said, "You made me this way." Like that was quite the punchline too, because Kenobi's like, "What have you done?" And it was Kenobi's fault. He left his best friend to die, and because he didn't, he's this thing now. So I thought that was quite a powerful statement. That was kind of like the appetizer to what happens later on in the show between the two of them. Uh, and just seeing Vader's power on a pedestal, when he's walking through the village and just, you know, people are terrified of this guy. Why? Because you look at him the wrong way, he's going to snap your neck like he did to the person in the street. Um, that's the Vader that I believe is Vader at this point. That sounds kind of weird, but with the original trilogy and the way Vader was, sure, he was scary. But, in this time between episode 3 and 4, he has a lot of hate for Kenobi and he wants revenge. He wants to be the one that was better between the two of them. And we actually see that with the flashback sequence where Obi-Wan and Anakin are training, and that episode, in my opinion, was amazing because we got to see, why is Obi-Wan outsmarting Vader at this point? Well, it's because he's experienced, Anakin's motives for years and years, and the way that they did the dynamic between the episode was awesome. I feel like they put a lot of heart into the show, into giving us a good product and doing a good storytelling between Kenobi and Vader. And I think what the biggest problem was trying to inject a character like Reva and trying to get something extra out of this show, because there's rumors that they're trying to make a Reva show. So if that's what they're trying to do and they were trying to sneak in that little bit to, further something else from the show, I think that was a huge misstep. The Inquisitors in the show I thought was really cool. We got to see where their headquarters are. If you played the video games, we got to experience that a little bit. I want to say it was in Rebels as well, but I don't 100% remember. But it was cool to see it in live action. That's a lot of the things that I really liked. I do want to hear from Sarah what her thoughts were for the show.
Yeah, so Kenobi was my number two. There were some good points, a lot of which you just mentioned, with that final battle and the good versus evil and all that. That was I don't want to, take away from those good portions that you had mentioned. Some of the big beefs that I had with it would be in terms of why it's not my number one, right? Because it's not at the bottom of my list, but it's not my number one. And the biggest one is definitely Reva. I did not like how they handled her story arc for really just the last episode, but the last, I guess, maybe 2 or 3 episodes. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention this or not, but there was floating around somewhere out in the interwebs was somebody had done like a their own editing of the show to basically put it into a movie form and took out bits and pieces of the show completely, and it reworked her story arc to be the way I think it should have been, where she does not survive the attack from from Vader and the Inquisitor, and that storyline just seemed a lot more cohesive. And really, it was just taking the same film and taking out the bits and pieces that didn't really make sense with this way the story, in my opinion, the way the story should have been. The other kind of more minor beef that I had with it is that so much of it was focused on Leia, and not a whole lot of it was really focused on Kenobi. Don't get me wrong, it was really cool to see all that stuff with Leia, but this was supposed to be the backstory of Kenobi. The story is called Kenobi. I want to know, what has he been doing all these years? How did he get from, being a Jedi to, I guess, not just hiding, but doing these special missions or whatever you would expect him to do, you know? How does he get from one point in our timeline to the next? And doing these things with Leia was cool and all, but it wasn't the story focused more on her and her origin and what was her childhood like and her pet ladybug that was a droid and stuff like that. You know, it's
Lola.
stuff that's cool. Lola, yep. It's stuff that's cool to see, but it wasn't Kenobi. It was Leia. And I don't know. The big thing I think with why I put this at number two and not number one, and the one process of elimination, like you said, my number one was Boba. And when I think of why I rank these two in the order that I do, it's really comes down to which one, if I had to pick one of them to watch right now, which one would I like to watch again? And I'd pick Boba. I thought it was a little bit more action packed, and I don't know. I guess I just kind of liked the story more. Um, the Riva thing was so bad that it really puts a sour taste in my mouth for the show. And I know I shouldn't let one character ruin the whole show like that, but it just seemed like such a disservice to the, like you were saying, the laws of why can't some people die.
Yeah, I will say because they both of the shows had really good things going on for it and really bad things going on for it. But
Absolutely.
I think for Kenobi, the stuff that I didn't like being the Reva storyline arc. Um, and Boba, I didn't like the moped people. Um, I feel like Kenobi's story with Vader was more of what I wanted as opposed to Boba's because when I first wanted to see Boba, I expected bounty hunting and going out and dealing with crazy dudes, but it was kind of a 180 for his character, so it took a little bit to get used to. Whereas Kenobi, I knew he was going to be messing with Vader, and I really wanted to see, um, honestly, more of Vader than I did Kenobi. But it's that relationship that really hits home, especially since that's the trilogy that we grew up with. It was those two best friends that everybody was rooting for, and now they're up against each other. Um, it's fun family drama, so to speak.
It's fun when it's not your own family.
Yes, it's better to be the outside looking in. One last thing I want to say about it, because I didn't talk about this part yet, was the lightsaber battle between Vader and Reva. I talked about him stabbing her, but I didn't talk about the battle. But the battle was really cool because Vader was basically making her look like a child with just his force powers. Like she was trying to, stab, whip, destroy, whatever you want to say, towards Vader with the lightsaber, and he just kept putting his hand out and stopping everything. And it really showed his power in that regard. But then he took her lightsaber and he could have just killed her, and he split it in half and threw it one of the halves to her, and gave her a chance to go up against him. But again, he just toyed with her and ultimately beat her. I will say one thing that people really gave the show a gripe about for that episode was that there wasn't a second ship behind the one that Vader destroyed. Wrong. Go back. I specifically watched for that when I was doing my basically run through of it, and it was definitely there. I can tell you it was.
Myth busted.
Yeah, good stuff. So your number one was Bulba, correct?
My number one was Boba, and a good chunk of why that's at the top of my list is watchability. If I were to pick one of these shows from this year to watch again, that would be the one.
I think Bulba is up there for me as well in that regards. Unfortunately, I think Tales of the Jedi was kind of a one and done for me, but I really liked the what I got out of it. So that was the big thing with that. Andor, I really really don't want to watch that one again. But I probably will when season 2 is about to come out, just to refresh. Um, but I think at the end of the day, Kenobi is the number one for me for 2022. Can you go through one last time really quick to say what your 1 through 4 was?
Yeah, so starting with number one, my top of my list was Book of Boba. After that, I had Kenobi, then Tales of the Jedi, and followed by Andor, which was pretty similar to your list. I think you just had like one. There it was like they all rotated by one, or they weren't that far off.
Yeah, my number 1 was Kenobi, as we just said. Number 2 was Tales of the Jedi. Number 3, Book of Boba Fett, which really those three were really close to one another. The only one that I was like, definitely, I know what spot this was for was Andor. And again, no hate towards Andor. It's just it wasn't for us, and
Yeah.
that's pretty much what we leave it with. But that was our rankings of the Star Wars shows, at least the main ones, from 2022. We're hoping to do another one of these segments, of course, in 2024 for the shows from 2023. So look forward to that. But this is the first show for our Shoot the Sheev podcast. We will be having more of these coming out. My hope is roughly week to week, just because we've enjoyed just the new idea and what it can bring to us, and also getting more people involved. So we're excited to bring these to you. If you enjoyed this type of show and have some interest for the future ones, make sure to be subscribed to the channel and turn on your notifications. That way you are notified when these videos drop. Drop us a like if you like this video, and drop us a comment letting us know your rankings for these shows. What did you agree with? What did you disagree with? Let us know in the comments. And then, as always, everybody, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.